Morning YouTube, it's just after 6 o'clock and on Christmas Eve, and I'm making a video about YouTube, partly in response to a video that I just watched by Forever Wolf Films called A Little About My YouTube Life, which is a lovely video. If you get a chance to watch it, I'll link it. Also inspired by a video by a cyber guy talking about why he's on YouTube and asking people why they do the YouTube thing, and just some thoughts that I've been kicking around really, because I do spend an inordinate amount of time, you know, watching the faces of other people on YouTube, talking to me about things and talking to themselves about things. And the way that Amanda, the way that you do it, Forever Wolf Films, is kind of paradigmatic of what I'm thinking about right now, which is asking those questions about, you know, what you're doing here, feeling slightly either disoriented or slightly ashamed of spending as much time as I do on these things. I don't know, it's just something about that. It's a fascinating experience, being both captured by the media and abandoned by it at the same time. It's fascinating stuff. Anyway, the way I'm thinking about it, and this is I'm probably overthinking it, so excuse me if you don't like this kind of thing, is I'm thinking it in relation to psychology and the mind and the evolution of the mind, and particularly in relation to a piece of an idea that was put forward by a psychologist called Julian Jaynes, which is not a piece of accepted psychology by any means. He's dead now, Julian Jaynes. You know, and he got a lot of flack for this idea, but it's a really great idea. It's one of those ideas it kind of really doesn't matter whether it's wrong or not. It's such an interesting idea, it's worth thinking about anyway. But he had this book a while back called The Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. There's a lot of stuff online about it, it's easy to find. Origin of Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. And what he basically says there is that in history, and he's talking about recorded history, you know, the time of Homer and the ancient Greeks, that kind of thing. It's only a couple of thousand years ago. That in that time there was a fairly significant shift in human consciousness and what constitutes a mind. And he says prior to that point, the mind effectively had two chambers. That's why it's called bicameral. Bicameral, I think, is Latin for two chambers. Two chambers, which operated kind of separately. And I guess they would correspond to something like the older parts of the mind, the kind of reptilian brainstem plus, what's it called, the limbic system thing, and then something to do with the prefrontal cortex, I'm guessing, something like that. Or maybe a right-left thing. Either way, two parts of the mind, which were relatively unconnected. I mean, connected physically probably, but not as connected as they are conceptually right now. And he says that at that time, they didn't have the kind of internal monologue that we have now, that we know belongs to us. You know, when we think to ourselves as individuals, we kind of have voices in our heads, kind of. You know, we kind of tell ourselves stories, and we kind of hear ourselves thinking things, but it's always us that's doing it. You know, I mean, we own all our thoughts. But he says during the time of the bicameral mind, that wasn't the case. People heard voices inside their heads, all right. One part of their brain, if you like, heard the ruminations of another part of their brain, but experienced it as voices coming in from elsewhere. So the voices of the gods come in, he says. You know, in the epics of Homer, people constantly seem to be hearing things, constantly hearing the voices of the gods. And he says that's because he speculates that's what consciousness was like at the time. The way that the mind worked was that, as I say, you didn't hear your own monologue and possess it. You heard it as the voice of the gods, the voices from elsewhere. And then he says over the course of time, between then, shortly after the Homeric epics, I guess, these things come together, so we start to own our own internal monologue, and we become, our definition of what we are includes that rumination, includes that little drama that goes on inside all of our heads, where we think things out and we kind of hear ourselves arguing with other parts of ourselves, and we feel ourselves to be torn and conflicted and all those kind of things. I mean, just to stay on that for a minute, the evidence he gives of that is really, it's not great evidence, but as I say, it's such an interesting idea. But he does it by analysing the writings of the time, including the writings of Homer. And what he says there is that there's no evidence in those writings of that internal monologue. You know, if you read a story or a book or a play today, or within the last 1,000 years, it's full of people talking to themselves. You know what I mean? There's always soliloquies, and Hamlet's famous soliloquy in Shakespeare. People are always kind of talking to themselves and kind of owning their own monologue, internal monologues. But in Homer, he says, by looking at the literature, people don't do that. They're either describing what they see, or else they're hearing the voices of gods. That's what he says, and that's the kind of evidence he musters. Fascinating idea, really. 2 chambers. What's that got to do with your video there, Amanda, or Cyber Guy, and YouTube? Well, maybe this is what YouTube is, and not just YouTube, but social media more generally. This is just an idea I'm kicking around, really. Maybe we're in the process of cognitive and social evolution, in which the 2 chambers of the bicameral mind, which are kind of inside our heads, but not exactly, because a lot of the ideas that the second part of the bicameral mind offers is information from elsewhere, isn't it? Maybe the 2 chambers are sprouting a 3rd chamber. Maybe there's a technologically mediated 3rd chamber to our minds evolving here, that we're just starting to become aware of. And so as well as the voices from our own heads that we own, we're also getting voices from elsewhere. I know that sounds terribly speculative, isn't it? But I do sometimes sense that when I'm on YouTube or other social media sites, but YouTube is by far the most rich in this regard so far. If I'm on there for a while, sometimes I can kind of hear myself coming back from other users. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. Sometimes literally, sometimes people will make a video response, but sometimes you can put an idea out there, usually which you've got from someone else. You put an idea out there in a video, and then hours or days later it kind of comes back in different form. Someone else says something like it, or you get this wave of interest in a particular theme that you've had an interest in, and that comes back at you. And it's not exactly that it's you thinking it, but there is a sense of some ownership of that idea. You know what I mean? It's not just out there. It's not like a book in the library that you go and visit. It's something that's much closer up and personal. It's almost like a little loop of your own thought has gone out there, and here you are, and here it is making that re-entry point. That's just how I experience it. So, and how would that feel? I don't know how it felt to Homer and those guys when the bicameral mind was just coming online, but I'm guessing it felt a bit disorienting, the voices of the gods. And when they started to realise that the voices were their own, it probably felt a little skitsy, I'm imagining, when they weren't quite sure if their voices were their own or not. And I think some of the way that I feel about YouTube is a little bit like that as well, or the way that I feel in a culture that's suggesting a larger mind than the one I habitually operate in, but is actually kind of falling short. I would like my loop of thought to be out there more often. I would like to live in that 3rd chamber more frequently. I would like to own that 3rd chamber and feel it part of my own functioning more consistently. But because I don't, I think I'm in that same state that the Greeks were just prior to the coming online of the bicameral mind, where I can kind of feel it as a promise, but I'm not there yet. You know what I mean? My mind is not evolved yet to fully take on this technologically mediated 3rd chamber, and so I feel a little bit stupid a lot of the time, or I feel a little bit fragile and weak a lot of the time, because I can kind of feel where it should be going, but it probably won't get there in my lifetime. Anywho, thanks for that video, man. It's really good stuff, that, and thank you all for watching. Bye.